Despite what you've been told, you can actually appeal a negative decision by the asylum office. Okay, so it's not technically called an appeal, but it's functionally the same. And in this video, I'm going to tell you how it works. If we're just now meeting, I'm Brian Manning. I'm a political asylum lawyer. I used to be an asylum officer with the government, but now as a lawyer, I help people all over the country to secure their future in the United States through asylum. I got great news today that a client that I'm helping had his motion for reconsideration granted. What does that mean? A motion to reconsider at the asylum office is something that you can send in if you get a negative decision in your case at the asylum office and you got a final denial as a result of that. You get a final denial after USCIS sends to you what's called a notice of intent to deny. So here's how this works. After your asylum interview, if they make a negative decision, they say that you're not eligible for asylum. Well, they look at that moment when they're taking that decision and see whether you have legal status still at that moment. And if you do, like if you still have your tourist visa or your student visa or parole status and you're in status, then they don't send your case to immigration court, but instead they send you a notice of intent to deny. And in that, they explain to you why it is they think you're not eligible and why they intend to deny your case. But they give you 16 days to reply in writing to try to convince them otherwise, to try to show them why they're wrong and why you should get asylum. This is rarely successful. It's really hard to change their minds. But my client hired me after he went to his asylum interview alone without a lawyer, and he got this notice of intent to deny, and I helped him respond to the notice of intent to deny to try to convince the asylum office that he should get asylum. And we failed. The asylum officer wasn't convinced, and he issued a final denial, which says your asylum claim is denied, rejected, end of case. Now, my client had immigration status still at this point, so he didn't get sent to immigration court. He just got the final denial, and that's it. Okay, that's not completely it, because what we did was file a motion to reconsider. And this is essentially an appeal. It's not called an appeal, but it's basically where you're saying, listen, asylum office, way to the very top of the asylum office director, I think that you guys really messed this case up, and I want you to reconsider it. Now, there's no statutory right. It's not in the regulations or anything that says that you can appeal a decision this way by doing this motion to reconsider. However, the internal guidance with USCIS allows for it. The guidance says that an applicant can ask the office director to reconsider a final denial. Basically, it's an appeal. And so we did this. I explained my arguments again to the director of the asylum office and said, look, I think there's been serious error in this case because there clearly, in my opinion, had been. And about a week and a half later, we got the letter saying that our motion to reconsider had been granted, meaning they agreed with it. And they're going to send the case back to the asylum officer for further consideration. Now, technically, the asylum officer could still deny the case, but it's really unlikely that's going to happen because when the office director at the asylum office says, hey, you need to reconsider this, it means they think that the asylum officer got it wrong and that the person should get asylum. There's a chance that the asylum officer might make the applicant, who is my client, come back in for a follow-up interview, but there's also a good chance that they'll just say, you know what? You get asylum granted. And so this is basically an appeal. And in this case, it worked. It usually doesn't work. But in this case, we had a really good argument. This guy totally deserved to get asylum. In my mind, it was a clear-cut case and it was a huge error by the asylum officer. So for us, it worked. Now, this case was in the context of someone who received a final denial. Most people don't get a final denial when they get a negative decision from the asylum office because most people don't have legal status at the moment that USCIS makes that negative decision. Instead, either their status has expired, like their tourist status has run out, or maybe they entered the country without permission at all and never had status. And so in those cases, their case gets referred to an immigration court and they're in deportation proceedings. But in rare cases, you can get the asylum office to take that back and to give them another chance and to basically change the decision. USCIS policy says that an applicant can do one of these motions to reconsider if the officer has committed egregious error in making the decision, and USCIS will then basically change its mind. It's a little more complicated in this scenario though, because once they make that negative decision, when you don't have legal status anymore, they create a notice to appear and send it over to the immigration court, and that formally starts deportation proceedings against you. It's a little more complicated because the asylum office has to work with ICE, the agency that handles deportations, to terminate the notice to appear, basically to undo the initiation of the deportation proceedings. And that can take a little bit more time and be more complicated. But the end result is the same. The asylum office director sends the case back to the asylum officer and says, you need to take another look at this. And they'll probably change their mind and give you asylum. I gotta stress that this is really rare. I usually don't encourage my clients to do a motion to consider. These are so rarely granted that it's usually not worth the time. So even if I think that the asylum office got it wrong, it's still usually not worth it to do a motion to reconsider. But sometimes it's so obvious to me that there's been a big error by the asylum officer in applying the law that we've just got to take this step and make this effort. And sometimes it works. So just know that it's not necessarily the end when you get that final denial or when your case gets referred to immigration court. If you can make a compelling argument about why they really messed up and it's super clear and it constitutes a legal error, then you can do a motion to reconsider and try to get your case won at the asylum office. If you want more tips that could help you secure your future in the United States through asylum, then subscribe to my YouTube channel, Manning Asylum Law. And let me know in the comments what questions you have about asylum. It's my honor to support you in your asylum journey.